Well, hello. Good afternoon, class. I hope everyone's doing great. I know it's been a hectic week, but we're almost done with the semester, and I just wishing everyone the best and hope everyone is having a great week. I know I am. So let's begin with the lesson. So yesterday we were wrapping up the film of Gangs of New York, and today we will be discussing both the text The Outsiders and the film Gangs of New York. And we're going to be looking some of the similarities um, between the main protagonists in the film, as well as looking at some history behind the film and the text, as well as um, some possible personal connections that can be found from the text and the film. So before we begin the lesson, I would like everyone to do this warm up activity. The admit slips. If you're not familiar with admit slips are, they're basically students reacting to the film and the text and getting a sense of what they're feeling about what they're studying. So a few of the questions I have here that you could answer would be can you relate to any of the characters from the text or the film? Do you have any personal connections or have witnessed any gang violence or violence in general? These are some of the questions you can answer on your admit slips. If you have an index card, if you can even use half a sheet of notebook paper. I want you to take this time to just write about what you're feeling when you think about what we've recently reviewed from the text as well as what you saw in the film. You know, I just want to get an insight of what everyone's feeling, and this is a great way to do it. So if you could please take a moment and do that. Once again, to repeat the questions that I have for you, either can you relate to any of the characters within the film or the text? And do you have any personal connection to gang violence or violence in general? So take a few minutes and I will be right back with everyone. And as everybody's doing these admit slips, I also want you to start thinking about the main protagonist in the film as well as the text. And the main two characters we will be talking about is Ponyboy Curtis from The Outsiders and Amsterdam from the film Gangs of New York. So start thinking about those two characters. Um, Imagine in your minds their characteristics, where they come from, uh, simple things like that, just to get everybody um, going this afternoon. I know it's been a little bit stressful, but I know we can all do this, and you know, I'm rooting on everyone to get everything done and finish on this uh, final couple of weeks of the semester. So if you haven't finished the admit slips, start wrapping up those because we will be moving on shortly with the next activity. And if you have not finished yet, Don't worry, you'll have time at the end of the lesson to complete those, and you can submit them to me after the lesson. So let's move on. So the rationale behind this lesson, or the reason we're doing this, is it's so that you, the students, can relate personal identity and geographic roots to a piece of writing, and in this case, the prevalence of gangs and violence. We'll also be analyzing the similarities between protagonists from two different texts, or in this case, a text and a film. And we'll be using the text and the film in cross-curricular activities with history. So let's begin. So the first activity, I want you all to start getting used to pre-writing strategies, getting your ideas onto paper, whether that's in a formal way of writing or informal. One of the pre-writing strategies that we've done in the past and will be doing for this lesson is the Venn diagram. So for this Venn diagram, we'll be talking about the main protagonists, as I said before, Ponyboy Curtis and Amsterdam Valen. And we'll be identifying some of their characteristics, their differences and their similarities. So let's begin. Here are just a few that I'll be mentioning. I'm sure there's a lot more that you all can think of so that you can add towards your critical essays later on in the lesson. So for Ponyboy Curtis, one of his characteristics that differentiates from Amsterdam is that he's a hero. Although he got into an altercation with the rival gang, the Sox or Soch, he saves the lives of the children that were caught in the burning church, as well as he develops as a character. He realizes that we're not so different from the rival gang. They have issues as well. Just because they're more privileged doesn't necessarily mean that they don't have problems that they have to endure in their own lives. Another characteristic that you can mention is that he's smart. When they wrote about him in the newspaper, they said he excels in his academics. That was one thing that he was known for, and that his older brothers pushed him to do so that he could progress and be better than them. Ponyboy is known for these things and for being in athletics. So he had a bright future before the incident. So let's move on to Amsterdam. You could say he's an anti-hero because he's motivated by revenge. As soon as he came back to the city of New York, from being in the foster home, is he wanted to get his revenge for his father's death. He wanted to come after Bill the Butcher. So his entire reasoning, his entire intent of plotting against Bill was to get the revenge for his father. And that's where we can go with him being clever. He develops this plan to take down Bill, to pretend to be his right-hand man, to get into the gang and show his loyalty so that when that time comes, he could take advantage of Bill. And in other words, unalive him. And one last characteristic that differentiates from Ponyboy is that he's troubled with wanting revenge. That's his entire motive. He goes to great lengths just to avenge his father, whether that means taking advantage of those around him or not. And that's when we'll be moving on to some of the similarities between both of the characters. We can say that both are orphans. Ponyboy lost his parents in a car accident, I believe, and Amsterdam lost his father when the two gangs at the beginning of the film went after each other to take control over the city. Another characteristic that you can say is they're both part of a gang. Ponyboy is with the Greasers, and Amsterdam is with the Dead Rabbits. And one last characteristic that I will be mentioning is there's an initial hatred for their enemy or the rival gang between both characters. Whether they were born into it, whether it developed within the story, they both initially hated the rival gang. So these are just some characteristics that you can mention in your critical essays. And I look forward to seeing what other ideas you all can come up with, or what different direction you may take with your essays. You're not necessarily stuck to this strategy. You can use different strategies like brainstorming, free writing. I just want everyone to get the hang of getting their ideas out onto paper before they start writing, so that they can evaluate where they want to take their essays and how they want to develop it. So let's move on. So now we'll be moving on to the history behind the text in the film. Necessarily speaking about at the time, where the time periods and the settings of where these stories are based off of. For example, The Outsiders. The author talks about how she was influenced or inspired by growing up in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and seeing these two rival gangs, the Greasers and the Sox, in high school. She wrote this entire story during her time in high school and finished, I believe, soon after graduation. This story was developed or began writing in 1965. And during this time in history, desegregation was a major issue in Tulsa, Oklahoma. You know, there's a lot of tension in the community. Some background information that I found was in August 21st, 1968, 5 Black students were refused enrollment in the 10th and 11th grade at Charles Page High School. So at the time, this was a major issue for many Black families and Black students dealing with desegregation. And a lot of the white members in the community did not want to deal with these students. And unfortunately, I mean, they got the short end of the straw, and it affected their academics. So that is one event that happened during this time period in Tulsa, Oklahoma. Another example we have for gangs in New York during this time, and it's even mentioned in the film, in New York City during 1862, the New York City draft riots. It was said that many of the Irishman workers were uh, rioting and protesting against these wealthy men that were paying off individuals to basically take their place in the drafts. And obviously, the Irishmen didn't want to uh, be a part of the draft, and it caused a lot of uproar. And unfortunately, some of the white rioters started attacking black individuals, and ultimately, it resulted in an estimate of 120 individuals that were murdered within that week, just because of these riots. So history does play a part um, in these texts and in these films, and it's definitely something that we should take into consideration when we're reading about these type of stories. And that will lead us to the prevalence of gangs and violence, specifically for the story of The Outsiders. So, like I said, this story was inspired by the author's experience in high school, uh, and it was a major issue in this setting and during the 1950s and 1960s, where you had gang violence in schools, not necessarily in the community, within the school. So uh, when we talk about these things, I want you to consider, you know, have you ever witnessed any gang violence in your life? Do you know any relatives that have stories? I know I, for one, my older brothers experienced uh, a bit of gang violence during their time in high school, right before I entered. And it was very prominent in high school. You know, you were either part of the group or you weren't. And it was hard not to be, because most of the members in these groups were close friend of yours, friends that you grew up with. So it was very difficult to not be a part of, or uh, not be associated with someone that was in a gang. And that was in the early 2000s. So around this time, I believe gangs, in my opinion, were a lot worse, because I know when I entered high school, it wasn't necessarily an issue then. So it's something to consider and something to think about when you're writing your critical essays. What's your personal connection? You know, how do you feel about these issues of gang violence or violence in high school or in this setting? And then we'll move on to the gangs in New York and the NYC draft riots. I know the timeline for this is pretty far out, 1862, when this occurred. But at the same time, I'm sure we could think of a few riots in modern times that have caused a lot of uproar and controversy. And it's something that even in today's day is still very prominent. For example, we have the Black Lives Matter movement. There's Antifa. These are things that do occur regardless of whether it's in the past, present, and possibly in the future. So I want y'all to consider how you feel about these things and share, you know, your ideas, your feelings in your work. Don't be afraid to personalize your writing. It's definitely one thing I learned uh, within my time doing creative writing and writing in general. Well, one of biggest, uh, my biggest, I guess, highlights or things that my professors highlighted about my work was how personal I got within my own writing, and they really appreciated um, that voice that I was giving to the reader. So I do encourage you all to share your feelings within your work. So let's move on to the next slide. And this will actually be the last activity for this lesson. I want everyone to get in learning circles, whether that's groups of 3 to 5. And I want you all to get together, talk about the film, the text, and a bit. Basically, I just want everyone to share ideas, share, how you feel about these topics such as gang violence, uh, whether that's in the community, in school, um, and basically help each other out, give each other ideas on what you could possibly create for this critical essay that is coming up. Um, and also, I want you to start practicing some of these pre-writing strategies. As you do these learning circles, I encourage everyone to take notes, and um, if you have any suggestions or if you take anything from these learning circles, definitely feel free to jot them down. And it's best to have some physical information that you can look back on. I know I find it very beneficial because I'm constantly thinking about other things and I forget what's discussed at times. So taking notes definitely does help me out. Um, so yeah, for the remainder of the class and the lesson, I want everyone to gather together and just help each other out. Start preparing for this critical writing assignment. Think about whether you're gonna reference the text and compare contrast, whether you're gonna mention the differences and similarities between the film and the text, and as well how you plan or if you want to mention your personal connection or personal relationship to some of these issues. So um, feel free to take this time to also ask me any questions if you do have any. And that's pretty much it. I wish everyone the best. Like I said, if you have any questions, feel free to ask. I'll be at my desk, and we will wrap up the remainder of this classroom doing this activity. So thank you for taking the time to listen.